Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversation in Horror, the podcast. I'm your host, Kevin L. Powers. I'm also the owner operator of Something Wicked Entertainment and Events, and welcome to our podcast today. If you are familiar with our program, what you'll know is that what I do is that me and a special guest come on the show and kind of dissect and discuss, or in other words, have a conversation about a particular horror film. Now, this is usually just one film that we focus on per episode so that we can kind of get really good and into the meat of whatever film we are talking about. Plus, if we were to talk about more than one film, if you, the audience, didn't like one of the 2 or 3 films we're talking about, you'd probably skip the whole episode. Instead, if you don't like the film we're talking about, you can just skip the whole episode anyways. But we hope that you will listen to the episode, all of them, in order to allow us to give you another opinion on some of the movies, whether you love them, you loathe them, or you're just in the middle. Now, the film that we're discussing today is part of our special Aquatic Horror Month. So we're all very eager and happy to be discussing this small little group of subgenre of horror, because I know that I am not the only fan of aquatic horror out there. So I'm hoping to, spread the love. The movie that we're going to be talking about tonight is the 2002 film Ghost Ship. And my special guest today is Sarah Panazzo, who is returning for the show. We love when she's coming on the show. Thank you so much to discuss this film today.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for having me back.
I don't know whether or not this is going to be a good thing or a bad thing that we are discussing Ghost Ship. But if you've been listening to the show throughout the whole month and you've been listening to our aquatic horror, they have run the gamut of different types of aquatic horror. So, this one's going to be interesting. So, Panazzo, tell everyone a little bit about what your thoughts are on Ghost Ship and when you first saw it, kind of your first impressions, that kind of thing first.
So I don't remember the first time I ever saw this movie. All I remember is the opening. And I know that that is true for so many people. It is such an insane opening to a horror movie. It is hard to forget. But then every time I watch this movie, I forget the rest of the movie. So then I'm like, wait a second, what's going on? And then I remember and I'm like, oh yeah, okay. But so it's a little bit predictable if you can read between the lines for a lot of things in this movie, especially if you can pay attention to character names. But it is a fun, ghastly trip, pure ghost story, everything. And like I said, that opening is just insane.
I will agree with you. One of the most talked about things on the internet about this film has always been the opening sequence, and I did not see this one at the theater like I would have hoped. I was a huge Dark Castle fan, and they were the ones that produced this film, but I for some reason did not see this at the theater, so I had to wait until it came on DVD before I actually saw it. And I was really really hoping that it would be a really great film because the cast was so great.
Yes.
Unfortunately for me at the time, I know I was not in the mood for this film, and I did not enjoy it when I first saw it. I didn't love the opening sequence. I really did, but upon rewatching it from the for this podcast, I kind of gave it another open. I was more open minded than when I first saw it, and so there's a lot of things in the film I do like, and there are still a lot of things I don't like.
Yeah, I mean, like the effects are really good in this.
Mm-hmm.
They can be pretty gruesome. I mean, the director himself worked for ILM as a VFX art director. And he also did 13 Ghosts,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably his more popular of the two. But yeah, I mean, the special effects in this just, I mean, from the ballroom changing scenes to the ghosts appearing and disappearing and the time change stuff, it's all really well done. The overall story, little bit forgettable. It kind of falls into every other stereotypical story, but that opening definitely makes it. The cast definitely makes it. I mean, it's one of those ones that we'll put on in the background just for entertainment, just to have something to listen to because it can be funny, it can be campy, and it's pretty well written. It's just a stereotypical ghost story.
But you know what? I really liked the second time I watched this. I like the vibe that these were like working class people who just work on a ship trying to make a buck in order to survive. These weren't rich people. These weren't people who were after like buried treasure. These were people whose whole lives is scavenging wrecks, dredging them up from wherever they are, and then making it, selling them or selling parts of them and making their money that way. And there are people like that, and I like the aspect that they showed that, and they just didn't just mention it like it wasn't a background thing. You actually see them doing their actual jobs. I don't recall any of that the first time I saw this movie, but when I rewatched it, I was paying a little bit more attention. I was like, oh shit, this was actually a much more interesting film the second time around. I actually really enjoyed that aspect of the film. That being said, I do like the cast. I had forgotten about all the people in this movie except for Gabriel Byrne and Julianna Margulies. I had forgotten all the other character actors that are in this movie.
Yes. Because I think I watched it again like 2 or 3 years ago, and I had completely forgotten that Karl Urban was in the movie, because the first time I saw it, he wasn't really anybody. And I was like, oh my God, Karl Urban's in this. How did I forget this?
Yeah, I know, that was so weird. I was like, oh, I was not expecting that at all. What's his name? Ron Eldar. I know I never get his name right.
Eldard?
Yeah, Eldar. I forgot he was in this movie, and I was like, oh shit, this actually had a pretty good cast. And then of course,
baby Emily Browning's in it.
Yeah, baby. I was like, oh my gosh, she's such a little kid.
She's such a baby.
Desmond Harrington, I think it's
yes.
Yeah, I was like, oh my god, I forgot this cat. This movie had such a great cast back then. I think I had a lot more fun the second time watching it, which is why I think I wasn't really in the mood the first time I was watching it. I think I had a lot more fun watching it the second time because I now knew all of these actors. And I was like, oh, which one's going to die next? Or how they're going to die? Because I couldn't remember anything other than the beginning. I literally rewatched this. I had no clue what the plot was or anything. Or I was like rewatching it for the very first time again.
Yeah, like I said, every time I find myself watching it, I like slightly forget what's happening. And I'm like, I don't remember who the big bad is. And then I hear people's names and I'm like, wait a second, it's totally this person, isn't it? And then I start piecing it together and I'm like, oh yeah, it's totally about like 7 deadly sins and everything else fun like that. And like, it's it's such a weird movie to watch for the first time, but then after that you're like, okay, most of this makes sense.
It's you know what, the only thing I thought was weird was how they crafted the Desmond Harrington character as someone who collected souls. I thought that was, I had no clue that was coming up. I had like completely forgotten all that.
His name is literally Ferryman, like ferryman, like Chiron from Greek mythology, and that was the first thing that I thought. I was like, he's totally ferrying souls, but then I couldn't remember the rest of the movie. But yeah, it's all like, okay, who's tempted? You've got Isaiah Washington's character who's tempted by the club singer. You've got a bunch of the guys tempted by gold. You've got Gabriel Byrne tempted by alcohol. And it's like, okay, they're all being tempted and they're all being chosen. The one thing that I thought did happen that I didn't realize, I guess my brain put it together more than the movie did. But for some reason, I thought that the crew at the end of the movie was her crew. Like the group loading the gold back onto the ship.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for some reason, I thought that was her crew loading them back on because they were still taken and cursed. And I was like, oh, I don't know why my brain thought that, but that would have been fun.
No, I didn't pick up on the ferryman thing either until the very, very, very end when I had realized, oh shit. It was like one of those dumb things I should have picked up on earlier, and I did not pick up on any of it because when I was rewatching it for the podcast, I was like rediscovering the film again after having forgotten everything but the beginning.
Yes, and they actually play into it quite a bit. So like the symbol that he burns onto their hands is actually very similar to the one from Greek mythology, but then all of the murals on the boat are actually based or inspired by Michelangelo's paintings
Oh.
regarding that character. So one of the big ones was The Last Judgment. Um and a lot of them are showing the fight between Chiron and there's a certain angel, and it's supposed to be like Emily Browning's character, where
Mm.
it's battling the good and evil. So yeah, like being able to see those in the background, I've tried to find stuff online that actually shows you the full thing, but there's like nothing I can find.
All right.
But I was like, that's pretty cool, and that's a very great hint if you could actually see them more.
See that? Okay, yeah, that would make much more sense. Also, it'd make the whole film much more interesting if I kind of knew all that going into it, so I could look at that. So when I rewatch it again, I'll actually have a greater insight on some of the other stuff I never picked up on. Because unfortunately, when the movie was released, it was part of the Dark Castle's early films, and it kind of
Yeah.
got spearheaded with all the other films that were being released, the 13 Ghosts, House on Haunted Hill,
Yeah.
and I forget which was the next one after this, because after that they did the House of Wax, and
Yeah, it was just like one right after the other of like around the time they was just so convoluted. There were so many, and now looking back, it's like actually these were pretty decent movies. Like when we talked about House
House
of
of
Wax,
Wax.
where we were like, oh yeah, it was kind of and now going back, we're like, no, it's actually a really good movie.
Yeah, I know. I was like, I was getting that too when I was rewatching. I was like, oh shit, this is another House of Wax. Is this better than I freaking remembered it? Oh my god.
Well, and it's funny because like we said, Steve Beck, the director, also directed 13 Ghosts, but
Mm-hmm.
the entire opening is a reference to that one famous scene in 13 Ghosts where they have the like shredder net going across the one room.
Oh.
And they were like, how can we do this bigger and badder? And it's really funny because the original opening apparently had all of the passengers decapitated, but the studio deemed it was too horrific. So they decided to literally meet in the middle.
Oh Jesus. Yeah, I think they show one person get half decapitated.
It's, yeah, the captain has his like head right through his mouth, and then everybody else is like chest or lower. And watching some of the behind the scenes stuff where you've got like these actors like molded into the floor where you've got their upper half and a distended like bottom half, and they're like being fed water because they can't get out of the floor apparatus and everything. It's really bizarre to watch, but
Oh,
it was done really well. Like I said, the effects, like some of the effects obviously aren't that great. Like you've got them jumping out of the boat in on a jet ski, and it's like, okay, this is not great. But then like most of the other stuff, I mean, they literally built a giant section of the boat just so they could act out certain scenes, and then they would throw it into a CGI background. So a lot of the stuff that they did was really good. Like I said, the ballroom scene where it transforms from
I love the
decrepit
ballroom.
to the changeover is just gorgeous.
Yeah, and you bring up that whole sequence with Isaiah Washington with the ballroom, and he sees the dancer and becomes infatuated with her. I love it. I loved how they did all of that. And like I didn't remember any of this from the first time I watched it, and when I was rewatching, I was like, wow, this was really impressive. I can't remember the budget for these movies, but these budgets I can't hazard or I can't fathom these being less than 35 to 50 million each. So even back then, Dark Castle was putting a little money into these horror films.
So this one's budget was 20 million and they grossed
Oh,
68.3 worldwide.
really?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Well, House on Haunted Hill, House on Haunted Hill, House on Haunted Hill, and Gothica, still two of my favorites. But 13 Ghosts and this one are just fun to watch.
They really are. And like I said, like I hate that Steve Beck didn't do more of anything like this because they were a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously we're still talking about them compared to some others from the 2000s that nobody really talks about anymore. I mean, 13 Ghosts is like one of the most iconic remakes of that period that was like actually pretty well done.
Yeah.
And then this, I mean, like you talk about the best openings in horror, and this is normally at the top of the list.
Which is always funny to me because people don't talk about the film itself in high regards, but the
No.
opening is the one thing that everyone seems to remember and talk about. in general, in horror in general, as part of any of these films like this. It was like, wow, it's high praise for a film, but it was shocking. No one
Mhm.
expected him to start a ghost movie like that.
They didn't, and I mean, like most of the movie is gruesome in hindsight. I mean, you go from having thinking maybe the little girl, Emily Browning, is like the only one left on the ship and she starves to death or something. And then you find out like the extent that the crew went to kill off
Uh-huh.
everybody and take certain people aside and then killed each other. And it's just gruesome. And then there's more like rotting bodies because more crews come in to try and steal from the ship. And it's like, okay, how many people have actually been on this boat trying to deal with this?
Yeah, I had forgotten all that, especially about the Nazi gold and how it all plays a part in the story.
Hmm.
I had completely forgotten about all that. So as the story is unfolding, and you're realizing the aspects of the story in which you see other people have tried to steal the gold but failed, and their bodies are there, the people who are in the freezer. You learn about
Hmm.
the incident regarding the pool and everyone being put in there, and I'm like, oh shit, this is actually a much more interesting and gruesome film than I remembered it being. I kept
Yeah.
thinking this film is the PG of all of the Dark Council movies, but this was actually kind of gory.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's the whole implication with like there's a bunch of the guys who take Emily Browning's character to her bedroom. You don't see anything, and then you find out before then that she was hanged. So it's like, okay, there's a lot of implications there. I mean, there's the whole singer getting the entire like chain to the face, and it can be very graphic.
Especially for a film like this. Like I know that we're releasing an episode on Death Ship, which is also about a haunted ship, but very very different
Yes.
because you don't. It's the ship that does most of the stuff in that film, and except for this one, it's a lot of the ghosts actually who are trapped in this ship, and
Hmm.
or who are like the Nazi sympathizers or some of them because they all seem to be working with the Desmond Harrington character in order to kill and or get rid of the each of the new crew members. So
Hmm.
I
And
thought that
it's
was. Go ahead.
I was going to say it's funny the way that they do get rid of the crew members though too is they take the ones first who aren't necessary because at the end of the day Fairman just needs the boat fixed.
Uh
So
huh.
he only technically needs the three people and it's just really interesting watching everybody else get killed off and they're like, "Well, why are we still here?" And it's like it's literally just to fix this boat and then you're going to be dead.
Yeah, I like that aspect of the story though. I like the
Yeah.
fact that there's a reason why he needs those type of.
Yes.
Ferryman goes out of his way to get those type of people to come in because he knows that they can fix the ship and get it back running before it destroys,
Hmm.
and he's out of a job.
Yeah.
If his boat sinks, he has no job. I found that very funny once I realized the whole ferryman thing. I was like, oh shit. And I just believed that when I first saw this film, I was just not in the mood and I wasn't thinking.
Hmm.
And that happens sometimes. We all watch a ton of movies. All of us are horror fans. We all love horror, but sometimes we're just not in the mood in certain films, whether or not they're slow burners. We go in looking for a film that we think is going to be high octane, exciting, and we end up with a slow burning film, and it just changes our aspects of it. Or it's the opposite. We want a slow burning film, but then it's filled with jump scares, and it's like we don't really want that. This film is filled with jump scares.
Oh yes. Lots of jump scares. Very effective too, because like Emily Browning appears out of nowhere, just like in little cuts and snippets or whatever else is happening. I mean, I gotta say, one of my favorite scenes in this movie is when the two guys find all the food and they're like,
Oh,
man, this is the most delicious thing ever. And I'm sitting there like, wait, how is this gonna transform? Because everything else has been like kind of iffy.
you know what? And when I saw that scene again, I had to laugh. I had to laugh because the only thing I could think about is a similar scene in The Lost Boys. That
I know.
I was like, oh my god, how did I not remember this scene? It's so freaking hilarious. Because everyone talks about that scene in The Lost Boys, and this is just almost the exact same scene.
Yes.
Oh my god! And I'm like, damn it! I hate that I did not give this movie a chance because it was from 2002. We said right,
Yes.
and
Well,
I
and I think
haven't seen it
it's
in 20 23 years.
Well, and it's like you were saying, sometimes you go into these movies expecting this or expecting that, but then at the same time, like with as many films as we watch, I mean, you look at how many people have seen Friday the 13th and they think still that like, oh yeah, Jason is always wearing the hockey mask. And it's like, no, he's not. Like, and then you think back about it and you're like, no, he's totally wearing the hockey mask. And you're like, no, he's not. He doesn't have the hockey mask at all until like three
The
or
third
four.
movie.
But and like with this, like the big memorable part of this movie is the opening. And if you're going to remember anything from this movie, that is the part you're going to remember because it is so over the top.
And you know, a lot of the characters in this movie don't necessarily call to arms as they're going to be in horror films either. I
Mm-mm.
mean, uh, I can't think of her name again. Emily. Uh, uh,
Emily Browning.
Emily Browning has played in several, but for the most part, Isaiah Washington kind of doesn't do anything. Ron Eldard has done a couple of them,
Hmm.
or more suspense thrillers. But Gabriel Byrne, I think he was End of Days, maybe a couple others other than that. But
Yeah.
Julian Margulies, I think, has stayed clear away from this genre after this movie.
Whereas Desmond Harrington is in like horror left and right. I mean, like I know him best
Wrong
from
turn.
Dexter.
I was Dexter, but Wrong Turn. I loved him in Wrong Turn.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm like, I completely forgot he was in this movie. I loved him in Wrong Turn much more than this one, but that's because I now know exactly what his character is. I think he was having way too much fun in this movie.
Yeah, I forgot Gabriel Byrne is also the father in Hereditary.
What?
Gabriel Byrne is the dad in Hereditary.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. That's
I
right.
always forget that that's him. But yeah, I mean, most of these people did not stick with horror.
And you know, this was, and for everyone out there who may or may not remember the Dark Castle films that were inspired by William Castle, and a lot of them started off as remakes of William Castle films,
Hmm.
and they started delving away from that with like this film and Gothica, and then I forget some of the later ones where they said, well, we're not going to just remake William Castle films. We're going to start doing other things, and I don't they don't I don't know if they're still even around or if they still produce films, but when this one came out they were producing them left and right, like one every year at least, for a while there. So
Hmm.
diminishing returns, I guess. I actually don't know, because I can't remember the last couple films they did. If I did,
Yeah.
I just remember they were popular when they first came out, you know, and then of course, you know, they did Return the House on Haunted Hill, and a couple sequels and stuff. But and they were
Yeah.
getting a lot of great actors in these films too.
Yeah, and it's always weird going back to like the mid 2000s and like I could not remember the last time I saw one of the like Dark Castle
Mm-hmm.
films, and then all of a sudden I feel like I watched like five in a row and I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot this was like an entire company." But
It was a profitable short term thing, kind of like what Sam Raimi did with his company. Or wait,
yeah.
shit, what was his? Oh, I can't think of it now. Because Dark Castle was I think that was Robert Zemeckis and the other two.
Joel
Bill,
Silver and Gilbert Adler.
yes, that was those three. And then of course Sam Raimi had his same. I can't for the life of me. I just saw one from Sam Raimi's company, but he was doing
Yeah.
Ghost House. Ghost House. Jeez, I just saw a Ghost House picture, and he was around the same time producing the remakes of Asian films. So they were doing something similar around the same time, but he wasn't doing the gory ones like Dark Castle. So we had a great time in those early 2000s with a lot of horror films. Those for the PG-13 suspense crowd, and then those for we're going to watch some fun gory movies.
Hmm.
Thankfully, we got those films because the 2000s were kind of I want to say like a hodgepodge of films. The aughts were
Yes.
a hodgepodge of horror films, like so many of them.
You had some really good original ideas mixed in with some very all over the place remakes and
Bad movie.
of like older remakes versus US remakes of like foreign films. So it really was all over the place. But I just looked it up. So in 2015, Dark Castle and its parent company Silver Pictures were acquired by Daryl Katz of OEG. Um, the first film under OEG that was released was The Nice Guys with Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling. Also a fantastic movie.
Yes.
Um, then they ended up doing like Suburbicon,
Mm.
Superfly, Seance, Orphan First Kill.
Orphan First Kill. I do remember that being one.
And most recently in 2023, they did Old Guy with Christoph Waltz and Last Breath.
Not familiar with those two.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't necessarily stick with horror. I mean, they did The Losers in 2010. I mean, that was still their stuff, but yeah, I mean,
Oh, that's kind of
they,
sad. I kind of would have wished that they could stay with horror. They probably just, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of a weird one. I'm surprised.
yeah, I mean, they do have one coming out at some point based on the 2016 play Damascus. So it's interesting how much it like
Huh.
swerved away from horror after they got bought out. But I mean, even some of their latter ones that they did weren't necessarily straight horror. I mean, like The Losers. I
Oh
mean,
my God, I had forgotten about that movie too. I saw it. I saw it. I just didn't think it was all that good, so I forgot about it.
yeah.
Well, that's really interesting to hear that. That's what Dark Castle started from, and then what it ended up becoming, and now it's kind of like a footnote. Um,
Yeah. Because, yeah, it started with House on Haunted Hill,
mhm.
13 Ghosts, Ghost Ship, Gothica, House of Wax, The Reaping,
The
Return to
Reaping,
House on Haunted Hill, and then it got into like Rock and Rolla, Echelon Conspiracy, Orphan, Whiteout, Ninja Assassin, Splice, um, and just kind of
we that's a huge
it,
change, huh?
yeah, it gets to be very different.
Huh. Well, the interesting thing is we haven't ever decided to do an episode like that, but we can always go back and delve deep into companies like Ghost House and Dark Castle and
Yeah.
kind of say, this movie was good, this movie was trash. That's probably why they went out of business. Because it'd be something very similar to the way we would talk if we were talking about the new Hammer Studios films.
Yes.
Oh, Jesus. All right, so getting back to Ghost House, went on a weird tangent there. Wow. I don't usually ask this question, but I'm kind of curious because this came up in one of my other conversations. Uh, do you have a favorite kill in this movie, or do you have a favorite incident in this movie?
Oh man, I mean the whole opening is probably the one of the greatest kills I've ever seen because you've got the quick cut from like the wire snapping, you get the hum of the actual wire. They even give you the nice visual effect of the wire cutting off the heads of flowers. And it's like you could have just left it at that and everybody would have gotten the exact point, but you decided to go into A plus territory and do like a follow cam on the actual wire.
So if I hadn't have done this recorded these conversations earlier, I had when I watched this one, when I rewatched this film, and the way that the cinematography and the editing was done with the opening sequence, the first thing that came to mind was a Rube Goldberg incident from like Final Destination. And I
Yes,
did not think about that because Final Destination was what, a year or two old when this was released. So when
I
I saw
think so, yeah.
so now we've got six films, and I had watched Bloodlines, the new one, right before seeing this, and that's the first thing I thought about when I was rewatching this movie was the beginning that sequence, and I had wished that something like that would have like hit on that and did
Hmm.
that in some of the other kills, but some of the other kills are not nearly as interesting. Because for the life of me, I'm trying to figure out if I think Gabriel Burns is off camera.
Yes, because he ends up being put in like the tank or whatever that then slowly fills up with water.
Yeah,
Um, you've got uh Greer, Isaiah Washington Isaiah Washington's
He
character
falls.
who falls straight through the naked ghost
Yeah.
into the elevator shaft. The only other one you don't see is Dodge because Munder gets sucked into the underwater gears, but Dodge you think is alive, and then it turns out it's Ferriman
Yeah.
pretending to be him.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, that could have been a great opportunity, but I know they wanted to keep the suspense of disbelief that he's really the real one and not Ferryman in disguise.
Yes.
But I didn't really like. It's like at that point you kind of already have figured it out, so you're like,
Yeah.
And you know because they're trying to hide it that they're trying to hide something. And
Yeah, because he's not suspicious the entire movie. And then they start finding like, okay, the digital watch on the ship and everything else, and it's like, okay, so clearly people have been here. You just magically found a boat in the middle of the water. And I mean, they even make fun of him. They're like, oh my God, you found the boat in the middle of the water.
I know that was actually that is quite funny.
There
Because one of the funny sequences I did like was
is a lot of good comedy, and they do it so well.
yeah, there is, especially the opening, not the opening, but the scene before Ferryman tries is at the I think it's a bar, and they're all at the bar. They're celebrating that they just finished their last gig, and they're going to take some time off. And then Ferryman comes in there with this great treasure hunt, so to speak, and they kind of make fun of him before taking him serious at all. But that scene right there shows you all the different characters. It's a really well done scene, and thankfully the actors were able to convey that each one of them are completely different, as opposed to them being all kind of the similar characters. I kind of like that part, and I like the way that does. And I kept remembering that same type of scene in James Cameron's Aliens when you first see all the military soldiers together, and they have that very same type of thing happen. Or when you get the original Alien, when they're all having the dinner scene, and
you've just got this wonderful camaraderie between all of them.
You do, and I could appreciate that for this film. And things I would have never noticed the first time. But 25 years later, and having critiqued all these films we have, especially going through Aliens and going through the Final Destination movies and all these other movies that I haven't revisited in a very long time, you see these type of things, and it makes these films much more enjoyable than I first saw them. And hopefully when people are listening to our conversation, they'll say, oh, shit, I didn't know that either. Let me go back and rewatch this, because I did not kind of see these references to things like Alien and Aliens and Final Destination. These type of things that probably influenced the director when he was putting this together. So
yeah.
Trying to think of anything else, because I wanted to. We're gonna come if there was any type of death scene that we were gonna talk about. It was always gonna be the opening, and you're right. Some of the other death scenes are a little lackluster, but I will say this: the very end when you see when the ship is when Julianna Margulies is in the water and the ship is being whatever you want to call it, and you're seeing all the souls going up. I found that one of my favorite visual sequences in the film.
Yeah, it was really beautifully done.
Yeah, and the thing is, you're not expecting that from a movie called Ghost Ship.
Well, and it's really funny with it too, because it actually makes a lot of sense, because the Northern Lights were originally deemed to be spirits of those who died violently, which is what they kind of become as they come out of the water, is they are becoming the Northern Lights. So it kind of goes back into that basic sailing mythology.
So see, I'm noticing things I wouldn't have ever even put together without you, Panazzo, because I wouldn't have never thought about that. Which is good, because when I rewatch it again, and I will rewatch it again, since I now have a really great Blu-ray copy of this movie, and so I can actually see it the way it should be seen, instead of like I think it was a DVD version that I had it 25 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm like, the thing is, we've covered some of the Dark Castle movies, and I'm sure they'll keep popping up. And so it's good that we kind of bring that name back into our fold, and that next time we do stuff, like I still want to do Gothica, and I want to do House on Haunted Hill. We talk about those, we can kind of delve more into Dark Castle and the films that they did. hopefully it's also something that other people want to hear
Hmm.
and hear us discuss. So.
I mean, obviously we've covered a handful of these already. They are great to go back to. Like I said, for the time it was like, okay, everybody was putting out some kind of random ass horror movie, but they are worth going back just for even the little things. Like we said, the opening with this is iconic.
Mhm.
When we did House of Wax, like it's so much better than it was compared to back then because you were blinded by Paris Hilton. Um, but yeah, I mean it's definitely we've had this conversation a lot. It's definitely worth going back to some of these older movies we initially wrote off because over time you can see them influencing other movies. You can see how they actually were really good for their time, but because of everything else going on, it was kind of just it was all too much.
Mhm. Yeah, and so as we're talking about this movie and coming close to the end of our conversation, one of the things is that we really heard about a lot and realized that a lot of people kind of look back on the 80s as a very fond time period for horror films, but the aughts are not given enough due. We kind of, I think Scream was 1999 or 1990
Or
somewhere.
something like that,
Yeah, it
yeah.
was right before the odds started, and so there was this really huge change in the horror genre in the films being released, and so there's not a lot of conversation about those early films. But as we're delving deep into some of these films for our podcast, and hopefully you guys, audience members out there, are paying attention, we want to kind of bring back some of the joy that we had watching these films and remembering them because they've been a lot of these odd films have been forgotten. People forget about them so easily, yet the 80s films are fondly remembered, and some of the early 60s, and if you go really far back to the Universal monster movies, people still love
Mhm.
those films, but not many of us are talking about these movies that came out in the early 2000s, probably because there's more bad than good, but still there are some good ones out there that need to be discussed. That being said, Panazzo, are there any final thoughts that you want to tell everybody about Ghost Ship?
Like we said, just give it another chance. Get through more than just the opening because it's definitely a fun watch. It is definitely a gruesome watch. But yeah, I enjoy going back and watching this. It's a lot of fun.
Yes, and for me, I just want to reiterate that because you may have hated the film when you originally saw it, does not mean that if you give it time, it won't be a much better film, and you might be in a better mood to reappraise these films. I am guilty, as much as I love horror films, as many as I watch, I am really guilty of when I was younger watching a lot of these horror films only once and never giving it a chance because I was always thinking that these films just sucked. And who wants to spend time rewatching films that they think sucked? That's why we have our show Conversations in Horror, so we can reevaluate some of these great horror films or see horror films for the very first time. There have been a couple. I will admit it. There have been a couple I have never watched before doing the podcast, but for the most part, I did see a lot of these films before, and some of them I just never bothered to give a second chance. So I hope that you out there, everyone, will give these movies a second chance, especially Ghost Ship. I think it is a film worth going back to, revisiting. There are a lot of great ideals in the film. You may not think that they all were extremely well done, but they are ideals that are there and are present and make the film much more enjoyable, other than the opening kill sequence that kills a lot of people. Uh, with that, we are going to rate the film because that's what we do with our show now. What we do is we rate the film from 1 to 5 stars, 1 being horrible, 5 being an excellent piece of cinematic magic. Where on the spectrum, Panazzo, do you put Ghost Ship from 2002?
I would say it is smack dab in the middle at 3
Okay.
because it is not anywhere near the worst movie I have ever seen. It is not masterpiece and Oscar worthy, but it is a solid horror movie that is a perfect mix of a little bit of camp and cheese, but also some very good gore and some great scares. So it is definitely worth a watch.
I'm going to put it as 3 as well. If you had gotten me before I rewatched it, I would have given it a 1. I think it's a much smarter film than I ever gave it credit for, and especially some of the aspects that I like that they may have borrowed from other films are also what makes this film work, in my opinion. And the cast, now that I know everybody in the cast and where they've gone to, it's a whole hell of a lot more fun to watch them all die in this film now. But I'm going to give it a 3. And I hope everyone here has enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Panazzo, so much for joining us on Conversation in Horror. If you enjoyed this show, make sure to check out all of our previous episodes and like, share, follow, subscribe so you never miss an episode. Regular episodes are released every Wednesday. Some of our special themed episodes are released on Mondays. And don't forget about our sister podcast called Conversations in 4Color, which is on our Patreon exclusive site. So you have to be a member and or a subscriber to listen to that one. And that one is all about comic books, manga, and graphic novels. From all of us here at Something Wicked Entertainment, we want to wish you a pleasant day and keep watching those ships in the seas. Good night. Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, written, produced, and directed by Kevin L. Powers, executive producer Kelly A. Inoka. All contents and material from this episode of Conversations in Horror is copyright 2025 Broken Lighthouse Pictures.